What is going on, guys? Jesse here. So the Galaxy S21 Ultra has been out for almost a year at this point, and I finally managed to get my hands on one for review. So I've been using it for a while at this point, and I think it's a good idea to talk about phones again once they've been out for a while after the hype dies down, because since the release of this phone, the whole smartphone landscape around it has changed a bit. And we've gotten some really strong competitors pop up like the iPhone 13 Pro Max and the Pixel 6 Pro. This video won't be a direct comparison because I will be coming out with a separate video on that as well, so make sure you're subscribed for that. So if you're still thinking about picking one of these up because you're starting to see some nice deals on these, there are some new things to consider. And look, I know it hasn't been quite a full year yet, but we're getting there, and it's just a nice round number to put in the title, so if you have a problem with it, sorry, but we're just gonna go with it. Alright, so starting with the design, I've got it here in the Phantom Black colorway, which if you guys remember, Samsung made a huge deal in their presentation about this color, and after seeing it in person, not gonna lie, I get it. I mean, if they didn't make such a big deal about it in the presentation, I don't think I would have thought it was some sort of super special black, but either way, I think it looks sick. The only downside really being that once you start handling it a little bit, it shows off your finger oils pretty readily. But apart from that, I love it, and I also love the rest of the design as well. I think when I first saw it, I wasn't such a big fan of it, but after looking at it more and more, I think it's pretty sleek. Just the way that the camera bump falls over and blends into the sides makes it really feel like Samsung embraced the camera bump and made it a design feature, and I'm a huge fan. And the way that all the edges are just slightly curved and rounded a little bit makes it feel really good to hold in the hands. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again here. Samsung makes the best matte glass backs of any company. Like, it's just so much smoother and softer in the hands than any of the other phones I've tried, and for somebody who uses their phone cases like me, it just makes the experience of using this phone a lot nicer. And it's just especially apparent when you're testing out different phones and you're switching between them pretty frequently. So I would say that this probably has the best hand feel of any phone of this generation. Again, this probably only matters to people like me who don't use a phone case, but I still gotta appreciate the work that went into creating this. So moving around to the front, we've got a big, beautiful 6.8 inch, 120Hz, 1440p dynamic AMOLED display that is still a year later, probably the best on the market right now. Pretty much anything you would want in a smartphone screen is in here. 120Hz for super smooth motion around the UI and within apps and games, 1440p for super sharp images and text, and you can actually use the 120Hz and the full 1440p resolution at the same time, which isn't totally unique to the S21 Ultra anymore, but it is uncommon, so I thought I'd still mention it. Peak brightness of 1500 nits, so you shouldn't have any issues using this even in bright sunlight, and colors, contrast, and all that look great as well. And I would even wager to say that this will probably be the best display that you have in your house if we take size out of the equation. So no complaints whatsoever on this front. It really feels like at this point the only ones that can beat Samsung at smartphone displays is a newer Samsung phone. And that, combined with the stereo speakers, which are surprisingly good, makes consuming media and playing games on this a really good time. Having such a large display does come with its downsides as well though, mainly that this is definitely not a one-handed phone, and if something is in that top corner, you better be prepared to do some hand gymnastics. Although I will say that I found I hardly ever need to reach up there anyways, cause usually the only thing that's up there is a back button and you can just use gestures for that. Something that I definitely missed having after starting to use the iPhone. They also got rid of the edge display where the screen would kind of curve over the edges, which always looked really cool for the marketing and that sort of thing, but also always caused a bunch of accidental touches, so I'm pretty glad that it's gone. Under the display, we've got an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor that works very well. The last time that I tried one of these out was in the Note 20 Ultra, and honestly, I had a lot of issues with that one, with failed attempts about half the time. But I'm glad to say that with this one that we have here, I haven't had any of those issues. It works pretty quickly and the accuracy has been greatly improved. You can also use face recognition as well just for some redundancy, which I love about Samsung phones, although you can't use it for anything that requires a little bit more security like signing into your bank app, for example. For that, you would have to use the fingerprint sensor instead. Also, by the way, if you're enjoying the content so far, I would really appreciate it if you guys like the video and sub to the channel. It really does help a lot. Anyways, inside the phone we've got all the flagship specs that you would expect from Samsung. Snapdragon 888, Adreno 660 GPU, 12 gigs of RAM with a base storage of 128 gigs up to 512, with the 512 model getting a bump up in RAM as well to 16 gigs, but no expandable storage sadly. So essentially just all the flagship specs. And as you might expect, this thing just flies through anything that you throw at it. Apps, games, and all that, this thing just chews through it like it's nothing, and with 120Hz, everything looks super crazy smooth. But I mean, that's pretty normal for a flagship phone in 2021. What I will say though, and I'm not sure if this is because of the processor or the way that Samsung does their animations, this phone feels snappier than the iPhone or Pixel, even though those are newer. It's not by a lot, but it's just enough that I notice a difference when I'm switching between them. So software wise, this is still running One UI 3, which is, depending on who you are, could be a good or a bad thing. For the most part, it's pretty clean, and going through the UI, nothing jumps out as being offensive, but overall I would say that I still prefer something closer to stock Android. But the thing that I think really stands out with the Samsung software in general though is the sheer number of features and customization options that they managed to pack into this, like the Edge panel, which allows you to have certain apps and features available to you anytime by swiping in from an edge. And that's just one example, but there really are a lot in there that I just don't have the time to go through. But one of the great things about this is if you ever get bored of the phone and it just starts to feel a little bit old, just go into the settings app, switch a few things around, and this starts to feel like a brand new phone again. And it's almost like a scavenger hunt, which I really enjoy. But if you've used any of the Samsung phones for the past couple of years using the first or second versions of One UI, this is mostly the same experience, so you pretty much know what to expect. One thing that really surprised me when using this phone though was the battery life. Honestly, for the past couple of years, Samsung phones haven't really had the best performance in this category, and I think part of it was just because they overloaded it with so many features, but this year we've got a 5000 mAh battery, which does a really good job. Like, I have yet to kill this in a day. Now, if you really push it with a lot of heavy usage with a bunch of GPSing, taking photos and videos and that sort of thing, you might be able to kill it in a day, but I think you would have a pretty tough time doing it. Once you do get to the end of the battery though, to charge it back up, we've got 25 watt wired charging and 15 watt wireless charging, which is nothing special, especially when we have phones nowadays that can go upwards of 100 watts. But this lower wattage charging should help with long-term battery health. And lastly, let's talk about the cameras. So the photo quality on the cameras is still mostly what you would expect from a Samsung flagship smartphone, but now with some interesting extra features. But let's go over the hardware first. For the main camera, we have a 108 megapixel f1.8 lens, 12 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide, 10 megapixel f2.4 telephoto, and very special to this phone is you get a fourth camera, which is a 10 megapixel f4.9 10 times periscope telephoto zoom lens. Now, you may be wondering why Samsung felt the need to put two telephoto zoom lenses into this camera system. Well, if they just put in that longer 10 times zoom lens, then everything from the regular wide up to that 10 times zoom would have to be digital, which just isn't ideal. And if they just left out the 10 times zoom lens and just used the 3 times zoom, then they wouldn't be able to get those super zooms that they love to market so much. So Samsung just decided to go for the best of both worlds and put in both. And I will say that at those longer ranges, this phone probably takes the best photos out of any phone camera out there. So mission accomplished. They do also let you digitally zoom in up to 100 times, but to be totally honest, it's probably something that you'll hardly ever use because the image that comes out of it is just so blurry and soft, it's kind of hilarious. It is kind of nice sometimes to have as basically a portable telescope in your pocket. Like if there's a sign in the distance that you can't read, you can just pull this out and take a look without having to walk closer. So as far as quality goes though, the 10 times telephoto zoom lens is definitely the worst out of the 4 cameras though. Having that 4.9 aperture makes it pretty bad in anything but the most ideal conditions. The other 3 lenses are much closer though, with the regular wide obviously being the best. They do still have that kind of typical Samsung look to them where the saturation is pumped up a bit, but not to the point where it's offensive. And overall, I really do enjoy using this camera system. Also, for video, all the cameras can now do 4K 60, but I found in terms of video quality, you're really not going to blow any minds here. Especially in a world where the iPhone exists, it's just really hard to recommend any other phones for video specifically. It just kind of has a gritty quality to it that I'm not a super huge fan of. But I think if we're comparing it to other Android phones, it's very competitive. But overall, this is a really solid phone, and honestly just a really easy recommendation to make. Even though it's been out for a while and other flagship devices have started to pop up around it, this phone is able to hold its own very well. In typical Samsung fashion, it's a really beautifully constructed device with probably the best screen in any smartphone still, that is fully featured in every sense of the word, with a great camera system that is just super reliable, and finally, great battery life. Like in the past, I found it kind of hard to recommend Samsung phones even though I usually really like them, because it was always the story of, well, it's a really great phone with great features and great cameras, but the battery life isn't great. And if we're talking about the usability of a smartphone and how it's going to impact you in your everyday life, battery life is probably one of the biggest things you should be concerned with. So I'm really glad that now I don't have to explain that caveat. And if you're in the market for a new phone right now and you find a really good deal on the S21 Ultra, I say go for it, and I don't think you're going to regret it. Anyways, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Remember to smash that like button, and if you enjoy content like this, think about subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss anything. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace!